Hi there everyone, I'm Nisha and welcome to Tales and Texts. In today's video, I thought I'm going to talk about choosing your first tarot or oracle deck. Now these are based on my opinions, and of course everybody has their own personal opinion, so I urge you to look at different perspectives and then take the best decision possible for your own personal practice. Now when I was choosing my very first tarot deck a couple of years ago, I was told by existing practitioners and also information online that it's best for new tarot readers to stick to the Rider-Waite-Smith traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck, either the original RWS or RWS representations and interpretations. And decks like, for example, the Wild Unknown, which is insanely popular, should be avoided because it's not suitable for beginners. Yet, when I took a look at the RWS deck, the OG RWS deck just did not make any sense to me. It was not diverse. It had only white people, only thin people, only young people. And although the imagery is beautiful in a very colonial way, it never really struck a chord with me, and I didn't really feel called to get that deck. After a lot of research, I did see a couple of other RWS deck interpretations, and yet none of them made any sense to me. And when I say sense, I mean they didn't really evoke that sense of awe and mystique and a deep connection, which is essential when you want to practice any sort of cartomancy. After digging around some more, I discovered the Wild Unknown. And as I mentioned before, this is a deck that is super popular, but which also a lot of people say beginners should stay away from because it uses something called as a Pip Style deck. Now, for clarification, the RWS decks use full imagery. You can see people, you can see animals, you can see plants and mountains and rivers, and there's a lot of descriptive imagery in the cards. And this allows you to create a story because you can read the cards quite literally, like reading a storybook, like reading a picture book. And this is essential as a beginner because you need to make sense of what the imagery on the card means in order to connect it to the traditional definitions of each card. Now with Pip style decks, Pip decks resemble your normal playing cards. Now playing cards, as you know, only the courts, the king, queen, and jack, are represented as people, but everything else is either diamonds or spades or hearts, and you get the drift. So it's very difficult to understand what, let's say, 10 of spades would mean, or 2 of hearts would mean, because everything looks the same on every card, but only the number of the items on the card is different. Now, the Wild Unknown follows Pip style to a large extent, where you have some imagery of animals and plants on the cards, but for the most part, everything is Pip. And yet, despite everything, I found myself so closely drawn and connected to the Wild Unknown imagery that I just could not resist. It began to come in my dreams. I thought of it all the time. And, I'm saying this because I put off my purchase for quite some time because I wasn't sure if I, as a beginner, should be going in for this deck. But after a lot of deliberation, I decided I'm just going to take the plunge. And the rest, as they say, is history. It was one of the best decisions I made in my entire life. The Wild Unknown the Wild Unknown tarot deck was absolutely phenomenal, and even to this day it is my most favorite tarot deck of all time. In fact, I have 2 copies of the large size deck, one just for safekeeping once the old one wears out. And despite it being a little hard for me to understand the meanings of the cards by looking at the Pip style imagery, I found that by studying and by using different books and by watching different YouTube channels which taught tarot, I was able to very quickly unlock the hidden messages in the cards. And that's basically what I want to talk to you about today. A lot of you might be facing this situation yourself. You might want to practice cartomancy, and you might be interested in a deck that is considered to be an advanced deck, a deck that is not for beginners, and you might be discouraged by someone else from taking it up. I want to tell you that it's completely okay to pick a deck that is considered advanced, even if you have zero knowledge of the tarot. And that's because ultimately you're going to use a deck only if you enjoy looking at the deck, only if you enjoy working with the deck. And if you pick a deck that is considered easy and considered beginner friendly, but you don't connect with it on a deeper emotional level at all, you're never going to touch it. And you're going to give up this wonderful, beautiful practice, which has personally enriched me and millions of others so much. So in today's video, I want to talk about how to choose your first deck and how to ignore naysayers. So when you're choosing your first deck, there are a couple of tips that you can follow. First off, consider what exactly you're looking for in the deck. Do you want the deck to be easy to read? Do you want the deck to be of a particular aesthetic style, a particular art style? Because, for example, there are some decks that have very collage style artwork, some decks that have watercolors, some decks that have just images or photographs imposed on them. For example, I think it's called the Life Tarot. I'm not sure. I'll put that down in the description box if I find it. So there are different styles. What exactly are you looking for? What is your aesthetic? Because if you like looking at the deck, you're going to go back to it more and more. Secondly, ask yourself, are you willing to work harder than normal, harder than usual, in order to learn the cards, if some of the cards are difficult to learn? Now, this is a very important question to ask, because although our first instinct is to say yes, after a point it can get really daunting to learn the meanings of 78 cards, plus another 78 if you're doing reversals as well. And you need to be willing to put in that extra effort if, like me, you want to take up a Pip deck or a deck that is non-traditional and considered to be better for advanced readers. Because these decks don't have as much literature as the traditional RWS and RWS inspired decks, and you'll need to do your own groundwork and homework when creating content for learning these advanced decks. So ask yourself if you're willing to put in that kind of time and commitment in learning these cards, and ask yourself if you have the time to learn these cards, because everything said and done, the RWS and RWS inspired decks are easier to learn and take less time to learn compared to Pip style decks, or even the Thoth deck. For example, the Thoth style decks are the most complex decks to learn, because you not only need to know tarot for it, but you also need to know astrology, you need to know Western occulticism, and that takes your studies to a whole different level. Now, I personally have not used Thoth, and there are two reasons for that. One, I don't feel I have the bandwidth to grant Thoth the time and energy and effort it needs to be mastered. And secondly, I'm not such a huge fan of the imagery of Thoth. To me, it looks very harsh. But I do prefer Marseille style or Pip style decks like the Wild Unknown. So once you ask yourself these two questions, then ask yourself, who are you going to be reading for? Is it just for yourself? Or do you intend to read for people in the long run? For other people, for friends, for relatives, for possible clients in the future? Because if you are unable to afford getting multiple decks, then you'll need to choose a deck that is friendly not just for yourself, but for other people as well. What a lot of professional tarot readers do is they keep a separate set of decks for personal use, which they don't use with clients, and a separate set of decks solely for client use or for external use, which they use only with other people. Now, not a lot of us have that privilege, and because of that, you might be able to afford only a single deck. So in that case, you need to get a deck that can make sense not just to yourself as you learn and you use it for your own personal practice, but you need a deck that makes sense for somebody else as well. So if you go to a client or a loved one or a friend and you want to do a reading for them, they should be able to look at the cards and get a sense of what the card might mean, so that when you finish the reading and you send them a photo of the reading, they can go back to this reading and look at the cards over and over again and get reminded of the message and the discussion that you had. So these are 3 really important things that you need to consider. And beyond this, you should also consider if you are ever interested in going in for oracle cards, and whether you have you're able to afford buying a separate deck of oracle cards. Now, if you can buy a separate deck of oracle cards, that's great, because you can then focus on finding a tarot deck that functions solely as tarot. For example, like I said, the RWS, the Modern Witch, the Wild Unknown, the Everyday Enchantment. These are different decks that function solely as tarot decks. But if you don't have the financial resources to purchase 2 decks, that is 1 tarot and 1 oracle, it's best to go for tarot decks that can double as oracle decks. For example, the Herb Crafter's Tarot and the Spirit Song Tarot come to mind when I say this. That's because the Herb Crafter Tarot not only provides the names of the tarot cards, but they also provide an image of herbs, flowers, and plants and trees, along with the name of the plant and tree itself. Similarly, the Spirit Song Tarot is not just a tarot deck, but it uses the imagery of animals and it provides information about the animal itself. The Nature Spirit Tarot is another example, which combines plants, animals, crystals, and the elements into the tarot very seamlessly. Now, these decks function as both tarot and oracle decks, because apart from reading a card as just a tarot deck or tarot card, you can look at the imagery on the card and you can dig deeper to find out what that plant symbolizes, or what the animal correspondences are, what energy is this crystal bringing forward to you. So beyond the traditional meaning of the tarot, you can go a step beyond, a step further, and read the card as an oracle card as well. And these decks, like the Herb Crafter, Spirit Song, and the Nature Spirit Tarot, are extremely good for people who can't afford to buy 2 separate decks, but who can use a single deck for multiple purposes. And in fact, I have both these Herb Crafters and Spirit Song, and I'm hoping to acquire the Nature Spirit soon, because I personally love decks that double as tarot and oracle decks. So these are some things you need to consider when buying your first ever tarot deck. And most importantly, you need to consider whether it bothers you that you might not have a community of tarot readers to support you when you are starting your deck study journey. Now, I personally never had a community around me, because in India, tarot is something really new. And when I started learning tarot, I had to learn only through books and YouTube videos. And that's perfectly fine up to a particular point. And especially if you choose a deck that is considered an advanced deck, the going alone becomes even tougher, because you don't have anybody else to ask information from. So once again, we come back to the point of, are you willing to put in the time needed to master these decks? Because if you are, then absolutely any deck is within grasp. Even a Thoth deck, for all you know, you might be really drawn to Thoth, and you might really love combining Western occulticism into the tarot. Then by all means, go ahead with the Thoth deck, because that particular system of decks is once again another system that people consider to be too advanced for beginners. But I don't believe so. I think if anyone is truly passionate about learning and mastering these cards, and you have the time to afford to put into these cards and to learn them, then you can learn absolutely anything. So I think the takeaway from this video is that you can buy any deck you want. Don't let your other tarot readers, don't let Amazon reviews, don't let YouTubers ever tell you that you need to buy only a particular type of deck because it's good for beginners. That's not really the case, because absolutely any deck can be great for beginners. Now, for example, the Harmony Tarot is something that is one of the decks that I bought during my very first runs, right after the Wild Unknown. And the Harmony Tarot is a completely Marseille style deck along with Wiccan inspiration, because Harmony Nice is a Wiccan practitioner. And The cards in this deck, especially the minors, have only pip cards. That is, they have only flowers, with just the flowers increasing or decreasing in number for each card in the minors. And that deck is considered to be difficult for beginners, but that's a beautiful deck, perfect for healing, perfect for shadow work, perfect to improve your knowledge of the tarot. So I say go ahead. Even if you're a beginner, you can go ahead and pick up that deck, because ultimately it's you who has to use it. The rest of the world can tell all sorts of long tales that they want, saying, this is it's difficult to read a non-RWS deck if you're a beginner. And while there is some truth to that, they forget that at the end of the day, ultimately it's you who's going to be reading, and it is your choice, your preference, and your agency that matters the most. So that's it. I think that's about the only things you need to think about when you're purchasing a tarot deck for the very first time. And the same goes for oracle decks as well. But since oracle decks are considered more free-flowing energies and they are easier to read and more open to interpretation, any oracle deck could work excellent for you. But when it comes to tarot deck, I say trust your gut and go with what you want. Even if that deck is considered to be the most difficult deck to read in the world, if you're called to it and if you're willing to put in the time and effort for it, go ahead and pick it up. That way you're going to develop a tarot practice that is evergreen, that you'll be passionate about in the long run, and that you will enjoy for years to come. And 20 years down the line, when you think back on how tarot started for you, you'll think fondly of that deck that everyone told you not to buy, but which you did anyways, and which was the best decision of your life. Alright everyone, thank you so much for sticking around so far, and I hope your first deck buying journey and experience is absolutely fabulous. If you do get your first deck, do let me know in the comments which deck you chose and why, and I'd love to hear about your tarot learning experience. Alright then, I'll speak to you soon.